Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson in the Johnson edition. That's what we are using. And now we turn to poem 437. Prayer is the little implement. When this poem was published in 1891, it was just titled Prayer. In many ways, we are back to poem 376. You guys will maybe remember when we did this little poem. Of course I prayed. And did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, "Give me my recent life I had not had but for yourself. 'Twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, than this smart misery." Now, I think Emily is intentionally responding, as Emily, now the theologian, intentionally responding to the Matthew 7:7-8 passage. Ask and it shall be given to you. Seek and ye shall find. I'm using now the King James Version that Emily would have used. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. The John 14:13-14 passage will play it this way. And whatsoever ye shall ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If ye shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. Now, I think Emily is going to hear in this one of several prayer poems, as we'll call them, Emily will make her view known in what one scholar has called a gentle, mocking tone. I'm going to leave it to you to decide whether you like that as the descriptor of the tone of this poem. Now, our assumptions, I think you've been following us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, a playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments where, for example, we commented on the fact that Emily struggled all her life with never coming to the conversion experience that was expected of young people of her time. And she grew all the rest of her life increasingly skeptical about religion in her own life. I'm also hopeful that you've already worked through the preceding 436 poems so that you can place this poem there. We just finished with 436, The Wind Tapped. Now, some have seen this as an impersonal definition of the process of prayer. The great scholar Whitaker said early on that Emily seems to think of prayer as kind of like a pea shooter. And one other scholar has pointed out that Dickinson dismissed prayer as, quote, an act of desperation, end quote. Now, again, as is our want here in this Chats with Emily, I'm going to leave it to you to decide. Obviously, if we could really sit down with Emily, one of the questions we would ask her is, what really is your view on prayer? And here we'll hear it is the little implement. Remember, we commented that she loves the word little. She uses it in 172 of her poems. Prayer is the little implement through which men reach where presence is denied them. They fling their speech by means of it in God's ear, if then he hear. This sums the apparatus comprised in prayer. Now, I think it's significant that we take a look at the first and the last word, obviously prayer, that we take a look at Emily and her view of prayer. Back to poem 42 with prayer. You'll remember 376 that we already looked at, Of Course I Prayed. Poem 61, we also, of course, had prayer that we've already dealt with. When we get to poem 502, she'll say it this way. At least to pray is left, O Jesus in the air, I know not which thy chamber is, I'm knocking everywhere. Thou settest earthquake in the south and maelstrom in the sea. Say, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, hast thou no arm for me? When we get to poem 1751, she'll say it this way. There comes an hour when begging stops, when the long interceding lips perceive their prayer is vain. Thou shalt not is a kinder sword than from a disappointing God. Disciple, call again. And then when we get to poem 1601, we'll see her view on prayer again. Notice here she says, prayer is the little implement. First it's an implement, then it's an apparatus. In other words, it's technology language. The implement through which men reach where presence is denied them. In other words, the only way for humans to touch heaven is through prayer. Of course, denied by whom, we would say, right? Denied them. Obviously, in this lifetime, her argument is one can't reach heaven until after death, and we've seen, obviously, her treatment of afterlife and the like. They, men, right, fling their speech. It's interesting, her use of the word fling. We'll see this again in poem 673 when we go there. The way she'll say it in that last paragraph is, "'Tis this invites, appalls, endows, flits, glimmers, proves, dissolves, returns, suggests, convicts, enchants, then flings in paradise." This use of the word fling is almost like a throwaway word for her. It will be used in 13 different poems. It's almost as if the technology is for her prayer is almost like the telegraph of her day, one might think. She says they fling their speech by means of it in God's ear. In God's ear phrase is only used this one time in all her poetry. If then he hear. And of course many have commented on the central word of this poem is the word if. Is this Emily the skeptic, or Emily the cynic, or Emily the doubter, the doubting Thomas maybe? If then God hears, this sums the apparatus. Notice again the use of the mathematics language. This sums the apparatus comprised in prayer. Well, what is she saying at 2a about prayer? I think her argument here is that prayer is the only thing left this side of heaven. At 2b, some have qualified it as a gentle mocking tone. I'm going to leave it to you to decide how you read this. At 3a, of course, all those Emily prayer poems, as we commented on them, 376, 502, 1751, etc. I also would leave you with, at 3a, Anne Lamont's observation that there really are only two prayers, thank you and help. That is to say, prayers of gratitude and prayers of succor or help. Notice Emily doesn't really comment either way on that idea here. And obviously we can think about St. Augustine's Confessions and his musings on prayer several times there. We've given lectures on confessions at learnstrong.net. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, what are your own views of prayer? And to what degree is Emily challenging you to think again on some of these topics? I hope so. Thank you.